So it's going nice then. Okay, so now up. Are we on?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got Kennedy sitting to my right here, who tells me we're live, and you can hear me. Yeah, great. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our briefing and webinar on the Community Housing Fund. I'm Tom Chance. I'm the director of the National Community Land Trust Network, and we've already had a few questions through, and you'll have the opportunity, hopefully, to ask more questions as we go along. To talk through some of the teething problems and experiences we've had with the Community Housing Fund and any other questions you've got about things you're not particularly clear on. We'll be primarily talking about the Homes England funding, which is for groups outside of London. The hub in London has already done an event just last week, and they've got information on their website about the way that the GLA will be operating their fund. I'm happy to try to answer questions if you've got them. And we can also talk, if you want, about the community-led homes programme, which we launched just last week, which includes some other grants like startup grants for groups that are just starting out, money to help you become a registered provider, and then Power to Change's Homes and Community Hands programme, which gives you additional funding for the sort of site and plan stages if you're in either one of their 5 cities or you're doing something innovative. So we're talking mainly about the Homes England programme, and I'll just start with a few questions we've already had to leap straight into it, and then we can open it out. So the first one was from John Hesselwood from Cheshire Community Action, who asked if you can use the phase 1 funding for a housing needs survey or assessment. So phase 1 funding is the revenue funding from Homes England, which is meant to help you get a project up to the point where it's got planning permission and is on site. You could potentially claim the cost of a housing needs survey and assessment as part of that application. Best thing to do, first of all, is just get in touch with your regional Homes England people and tell them a bit about what you're doing. They will want to know that there's a definite project in train, so you would need to have a group that is trying to bring forward a scheme in this presumably village in Cheshire, and then the housing needs assessment is one thing they're going to do to try to flush out exactly what sorts of homes are needed. John also asked if about a scheme where they've got Section 106 funding. So we covered this a bit in our briefing. Now, you can fund affordable housing entirely through the agreement in a Section 106 agreement, which basically takes money out of the land value and means that you have some grant or some money to help pay for affordable housing. The government has been quite clear with the Community Housing Fund that they want it to be funding additional housing that wouldn't happen otherwise. So if your Section 106 agreement fully funds a scheme and there's no need for additional grant, that wouldn't be eligible, and you couldn't use that grant to sort of top it up and do more than to just help you to further fund those homes. But if there was a funding gap, or if the Section 106 agreement in line with local policy would lead to, say, a third of the homes being affordable, and you want 100% of them to be affordable, or 50 or 60% of them to be affordable, that funding gap could be something you could be applying to the Community Housing Fund for. And you just need to show how that grant is going to be delivering additional affordable homes above what you'd already get through policy. And I suppose with this and with lots of the other questions that we've had for this webinar and for other questions we've had over the last 6 months, often the thing to do is to definitely try and talk to your local Homes England people first and just get their view on things. Now, I'm aware that there have been all sorts of teething problems, not least that when it first launched last summer, those people that were listed as contacts were just deluged or overwhelmed and weren't very timely in getting back to you about your questions and your applications. And some groups have also, having submitted applications, found the whole process to be incredibly slow. We're very frustrated about this, and we've been raising this with the government. So we sit on a steering group with the Ministry, with Homes England and a few other national organisations. And we've been making the case and giving examples of where it's been incredibly slow and difficult. They are getting better. They, over the winter, recruited a whole range of new people to be working on this fund, so they're more able to answer your questions and to help process applications more quickly. So hopefully the customer service you're getting should be better. And then they also seem to take a very long time to get their processes set up. So doing things like due diligence and making payments. I'm still concerned that the due diligence is a bit slow, but the whole process generally should be improving. And if you do have a problem, if you're not getting a response from the Homes England people, you don't understand what they're telling you, or you're having issues with them, then do come to us and we'll see what we can do to try to help you. We could talk directly to Homes England on your behalf, or raise it with the government, or just maybe answer some questions you're not getting answers to from elsewhere. Kendry, should I go on to another question? Yeah. Are we getting any from the? No. So you can ask. I don't know. In YouTube, you can ask questions there. If you're having difficulties, maybe just email Kennedy, and you can be periodically checking his emails to see if anything else comes through. So another one from Christopher Whitney from Foundhope CLT in Herefordshire. They are early stages. They've been looking at the leasehold updates, and they're just going through the process of incorporating, and wanted to know about right to buy and allocations. So they said, if a CLT leases land or buildings to a registered provider, will the CLT be able to block any right to buy under the terms of the lease or otherwise? So this is a bit complicated, and I would encourage you to look on our website in our campaigns section, which is under About the Network. It's a bit hidden at the moment. There's a page there on right to buy which explains the situation hopefully quite clearly. If you're a CLT that is looking to lease the land and buildings to another registered provider, you can write into the lease that that provider won't offer a right to buy to the residents. CLTs have discretion not to offer the right to buy, and in the deal we did with the National Housing Federation, they have recognised that and said that to their members that housing associations should also recognise the discretion of CLTs not to offer the right to buy. So you should be confident writing that into the lease to the housing association to say that they can't do it. Now, lots of housing associations haven't participated in the right to buy and don't want to, so in that case, you're fine. If you're working with a housing association that is offering the right to buy, maybe in Herefordshire, because in the West Midlands there was a pilot there, then you just need to talk to them about if one of the tenants in the homes wanted to buy their home, how that housing association would offer them opportunities in other stock, but not yours. But you should be able to make sure that your homes don't end up being bought out and you lose control of them, which obviously undermines the whole point of the CLT. Christopher also asked, what steps, if any, can be taken to ensure that people with local parish connections take precedence in applying for a tenancy over non-locals who may have a greater housing need? So CLTs you can develop your own allocations policy, but you will need to agree it with your local planning authority. That's completely standard for any kind of affordable housing scheme. And lots of CLTs have developed their own allocations policies based around local need, which give them the ability to give greater weight and scoring to local residents and people with more of a local connection. And if you're working with a housing association, then you probably talk with them about that. And lots of housing associations have long experience of doing this, particularly in rural areas. You can also, if you're a CLT or some other kind of community-led housing group, develop an allocations policy that gives you even greater degrees of control. So, for example, some groups have said that they basically have control over who they allocate the homes to, but people are only eligible in the first place if they are on the local authority's housing register. So once they're in some kind of housing need, then they are eligible for your homes, and then you can decide according to your own scoring criteria who you're going to give the homes to, and you might give more of a precedence, as Christopher suggests, to local connection or local contribution. It could be that they haven't got a long family connection to the area, but they're working in a local school or pub or something like that. You will just need to agree it with your local planning authority. So it's important to talk early on to the LPA. It shouldn't affect your community housing fund application, and we've talked with Homes England about this, them accepting the principle that CLTs can exercise their own control over allocations within a local planning authority's guidance. Another one came from different neck of the woods, Hackney in London. And they were worried their questions weren't 100% clear, which is completely fine because this is a complicated and confusing area. So hopefully my answers are close to 100% clear. So they first of all ask, if they are getting grant funding through, say, the Community Housing Fund, can they also be getting grant funding from other sources? And so in Hackney, the Mayor of Hackney has a Housing Challenge Fund. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And is actually encouraged. So you'll see in the prospectus for the Community Housing Fund that you need at least 10% match funding for the revenue grant, which if you're doing a smallish project isn't very much money, but if you're starting to do 15, 20, 50 homes, that becomes quite a bit of money. So your Mayor's Housing Challenge Fund might come in handy there. And also on the capital side, lots of groups in the past have taken a combination of a grant from Homes England with money from their council and other sources to help deliver really affordable housing. So if you're trying to do social rented housing in a very expensive place like Hackney, then that can be useful. They've also asked about state aid, and the way they've asked the question I think is quite interesting because it helps us to understand what state aid is and where we've had problems so far and how we've managed to resolve some of them in the past few months. So they say, first of all, if a CLT applies without partnering with a registered provider for both revenue and capital funding, and the total amount they apply for is over 200,000, would they need to comply with state aid rules? The first point is, you always need to comply with state aid rules, regardless of how much you're applying for. And what the state aid rules do is provide various thresholds and exemptions that allow governments to put money into things that would otherwise be seen as distorting markets and competition. So the 200,000 limit and state aid generally only really applies to the revenue funding. There's only a problem there. When you're looking at capital funding for affordable housing, that is by definition exempt from state aid restrictions. So you're complying with the rules by getting as much money as you need to make it viable to deliver affordable housing. So it's just the revenue funding. Now, if you're applying for less than 200,000 euros over any 3-year period, it's automatically fine. It's under what's called the de minimis threshold, so there's no problem with state aid. If you're applying for more than 200,000, and it could be just on a given project because you're trying to do a big and ambitious project, or you've already done some other projects or some other work and you've received money from your council or the lottery fund or some other sources, and you're going to go over 200,000, then you need to fall back on these other exemptions. And the one we've referred to in our briefing that we've currently got Homes England to accept is the what's called Services for General Economic Interest, which is about affordable housing. So if you're applying for more than 200,000, and most of those costs are specifically for to help you deliver an affordable housing project, that should be fine, and you should be able to go over 200,000 for that purpose. And so what you need to be able to do is describe all your costs in relation to that specific project and that affordable housing. And again, talk with a local Homes England person about it, and they'll help you to unpick that. And the other question that was asked from Hackney was, if you do partner with an RP, does this help with complying with state aid rules? The answer is it doesn't affect it. So whether you're a registered provider or not, if you're a CLT or a housing association or a co-op or any other kind of organisation, they all have to comply with state aid rules. The rules apply exactly the same. Their final question, a bit left field, was just not to do with the CHF, but to do with development finance and banks. And they said, what would the interest rate be for development finance? And obviously I can't answer that because I don't know what your project is. But if you look on our website, in the funding and resources section under development finance, we have a page on private development finance from banks. And there's a list there of some of the ethical banks like Triodos and Ecology Building Society that are both corporate partners of ours, along with others like Charity Bank and Unity Trust, who have lent to CLTs. And you'll get a bit of a sense from there about the sorts of rates you might expect. And it could be as low as 4% if you're doing something they deem very low risk, or up to 8% or more if you're doing something incredibly risky. And obviously the rate you get is going to have a massive impact on the viability of your scheme. So take a look at that page and get in touch with some of those banks early on and start talking to them about what you're doing, and they can help you understand what they can offer. Kennedy.
Yeah. So I had a Neil from Brighton Community Land Trust.
Yep.
I would like to clarify Homes England audit requirements / obligations for CLT groups to consider, please.
Okay. So if you are applying for revenue funding, you need to be able to provide proof of cost in order to get that funding, draw that money down, because it's paid in arrears. So you would say if you're part of the money is to pay an architect to do some work on your project, you'll be providing the invoice for that architect to Homes England, which would enable them to pay you. you may be able to swing it so that you get the payment through before you end up actually pay cash to the architect, so you don't have a cash flow problem. And that's the kind of key audit information that Homes England is looking for from you through the application process. And they're on the website. I'll see if I can actually just pull it up while I'm talking. The website for the Community Housing Fund sets out things like the Know Your Customer form and various other documentation, which provides the kind of main audit stuff that they need. If you're applying for capital funding, then it gets a bit more complicated because you need to be what's called an investment partner. And then they're going to ask for a lot more information. And they may, for example, ask that you provide audits, submit an audit of your organization, either every year or every few years, to demonstrate that you're a financially robust organization. And we've been pressing Homes England to be a bit reasonable about audit requirements, so that if a small organisation with 10 homes isn't having to do a full audit every year, because that's obviously quite expensive, but you will need to have some sorts of audits. And again, the thing to do is to talk that through with your Homes England regional advisor at the point of making an application for your finance. If you're not the investment partner, but you're doing it with another organisation like a housing association, then they may well be taking care of all that audit requirement for you. So we've had a couple more come in on YouTube and one by some by email. Okay, it's all piling in. Right, I'll try and speed up. Just one more we got in advance first, which is from Cirencester Co-housing. Just relaying their experience so far, and really that it was about their frustrations that they had been bounced a bit between Homes England and their council, because their council, Cotswold District Council, got awarded some money back in 2016. And Homes England first said, well, you should use that money. And then the council wasn't responding to them. And I'm really sad reading this because we had real frustrations with the way that the money was awarded to those local authorities. And some of them have been brilliant and have released money quickly and helped groups, and others have been a bit slow. The short answer is that if your council has CHF money, that doesn't stop you applying to Homes England. And if you've got a good relationship with your council, talk to them about how they can use their money to complement what Homes England gives you, maybe to top up the grant or to give you a different form of funding which helps you to draw down the Homes England grant or help with cash flow or whatever it is that you need. But no council should be saying we're not giving you anything because there's the Homes England funding. And equally, Homes England shouldn't say we're not going to fund you until you talk to your council. And if that does happen, let me know and I'll make sure we raise that with them. So a couple on the YouTube chat. I'll do those, Kevin. Yeah. So John Brownscombe says, is the community-led homes revenue grant separate from the grant groups to become RPs? So there are, I suppose, 4 main revenue grants we've got here. There is the startup grant, which gives you up to £4,000 cash and some expert advisor support if you haven't got an enabler hub to help you get going. And that means that you should get to the point where you've got an idea of what your project is about and you've paid your costs to incorporate as an organisation, which means you can now bid into other funds like the Homes England Fund, which is the second revenue. So that's the Community Housing Fund. The third is there is the grants for RP status, which John, you mentioned. So that is a third thing where you can get up to £10,000 to cover the £2,500 registration cost, plus any expert support you might need to get through the RP process. And lots of groups have gone through this in the past without support or with just the work from their hub, but you might need some specialist advice to help you sort out and get your governance and business plan stuff up to scratch. And then the fourth revenue bit of funding is the community Homes in Community Hands Power to Change programme, which is additional costs you might then have to sort of complement what you might get from Homes England. And I appreciate that it can all be a bit confusing and we end up with all these little pots of money. If you look on the Community-Led Homes website, there's a page there on funding which lays out all the different options and at which stages you might apply for them. And if you've got an enabler hub in your area, like for a CLT umbrella or similar, then talk to them and they'll help you to navigate all these different bits of funding. Nancy from Herefordshire asks about community engagement and co-housing. And we have another question about this, sort of similar one in advance as well, around what we mean by communities of interest and local community boundaries and community engagement. So with a community land trust, it's obviously quite straightforward because you say we're for a local area and you might define that as your parish or a town or some wards in a city. And then anyone from that area can join, and you engage your membership and you try to build up an engaged membership from that area. So it's quite straightforward. And then when you come to do a development, you might, in the planning process, be doing further detailed consultation with the community local to the site to get their input into what you're doing. If you're a co-housing group or a co-op, you might be people from all over the country. So there's a group at the moment building in Colchester that is actually based on people who are from London. And the co-housing network and the co-housing ethos talks about co-housing groups not being gated communities, but being integrated with their wider community. So who the community of interest is completely up to you. You can define that as you like, and you don't have to specify a local area or anything like that. But when you come to doing a particular project, and if you say, we're a co-housing group and we're looking to do this development in this bit of Hereford, then you would need to do further community engagement in that area to test the local views towards your proposal. Now, what Homes England and we would want to be able to see is that as a co-housing group, you have developed a membership large enough for the project you're doing, and you have processes to make sure that people in that group are definitely working well together. There's a sort of cooperative spirit or ethos, or even a formal cooperative decision-making process. So you've got strong engagement within your group, and then beginning to do some good engagement locally. And you just think of this, that where you've been a resident and some development's been gone through the planning system, and you feel the consultation's been rubbish. What we're really looking for is for you to do some decent consultation in the local area. You know, going out and organising events, evenings and weekends, putting information through people's doors, saying this is what we're doing, and getting their input into it. Then we have a question about whether the councils that have money, does that count towards the 10% funding when applying to Homes England? The answer is yes. So if your council got community housing fund money and they give you some of that, that does count towards the 10% match. It's not seen as just more CHF money. And that's a great thing that councils can be doing with their money to help you with that 10% if you can't get it from other sources. As I say, the average community land trust and co-housing group in the past has needed about £50,000 in revenue funding through what's the phase one. So your 10% match would be about £5,000. And if you apply for our startup fund, that gives you 4, so you're already most of the way. But yes, councils can use CHF. Nikki B asks, can we use CHF revenue funding to pay for our enabling hub annual fees? So this is a bit complicated, and I'm not aware of any enabler hubs myself that charge an annual fee. But some of you will tell me where you are and why that's the case. There's no reason why you can't do that, but it will affect the enabler hub if it then wants to apply for grants from us. So we're doing a grant program specifically for enabling hubs, and they can't use the money we give them to double fund stuff they're getting from other sources like what you're suggesting. So if you're paying them a fee to do that work, they shouldn't need to come to us for a grant because they're already getting it from you through your revenue grant. What we prefer to see is that we're giving grants up front for enabler hubs to work with groups, and they may then charge you a fee at the end, which gets capitalised in the overall project, so that they're recycling the grant that we give them to help them with the next project. I suppose it's unfair for you as a group to have to figure out whether or not you're going to be doing that. So if the hub is charging you a fee up front, then yes, by all means, put it in the revenue grant, and the hub will have to figure out the consequences for its own funding. Andrea from Brighton asks, can we apply for grant to support becoming an RP if we've already received money from the CHF via our local authority like we have in Brighton? The answer is yes. If you have allocated all that money to other purposes and you do need additional funding, then you can apply. We obviously, when you're applying for these grants, want to see what other money you've had so we can see that you need it. It's not that you've got money sloshing around, but you're just trying to look for some extra money. But as in Brighton, given the range of activities you've been doing, if you can't find that cost, or you have additional costs that you can't get out of your existing funding, then by all means apply for that RP grant. Neil Mann asks, can groups include costs for appointment of accountants, milestone sign-off and audit works in the CHF phase 1 or phase 2 grant application? Simple answer is yes. There's all sorts of costs that you should be able to include. And if it turns out I'm wrong and you get a response from your Homes England person saying no, then just let Kennedy know and we'll raise that and try and find out what the issue is. Okay, so Nikki tells me to go over here from Solcombe, of course. Hi, Nikki. So they've used up their full annual funding and it costs the hub money to support the CLT, so that's why they're asking this question. So in that case, if the hub can either be applying for that money direct through the revenue grant application, or you can be applying for it to pay them that fee, or it may be that they apply to our hub grant program and they get all the money they need to be able to expand their work. Do you know some hubs at the moment, they have had funding, but they're up to the limit of what they can do with their funding. And they've got so many other groups coming through, like yourself in Solcombe. And obviously in the Southwest, there's so much activity, which is great. Andrea asked a really interesting question. Will there be any report or information from Homes England or CLH about progress across the country towards getting schemes off the ground so we can learn and benchmark? And have some tea. So, I mentioned the Community-Led Homes programme that we've launched, which is a partnership between the National CLT Network, Locality, the Confederation of Cooperative Housing, and the UK Co-Housing Network. And there are various activities that we're delivering through that partnership. And one of them is exactly what you're describing, is to try to improve the amount of learning that we can do in the sector and to get to the point where we can do benchmarking. So one of the things we're doing is we've launched a database for the sector, which is building on data work we've been doing over the past few years to try to pull together information on all the projects across the country and all the groups. This database is now online, and we're looking to work with hubs and groups to keep it up to date and to furnish it with as much information as possible, including things like costs at different stages and what the homes are, numbers of homes by tenure and so on, which will enable us to do much more sophisticated benchmarking of costs at different stages. If you're interested in what existing research already exists on this, if you look on the Power to Change website under research, they've commissioned various pieces of work, including something that Resonance did, which had a bit of benchmarking about typical costs for CLH groups. What we're also then looking to do is improve learning. So we have just appointed 2 people to support enabler hubs, and UK Co-Housing is going to be leading a piece of work connected to that through what we call the National Advice Centre to get more continuous learning in the sector and to be bringing that learning into new and improved resources, which will be going on our website. So I'm pretty excited about this, and I think it's really going to help us to do exactly what you say, Andrea, which is to learn more about what works and what the barriers are and how people are addressing them, learn more about the sorts of funding needs and so on, which means that our lobbying and advocacy work nationally can be more informed and better targeted. And also if you're then working with groups, or if you are a group yourself, you can be better informed and benefiting from all that experience around the country. So Kendi, I think that's all the ones I've got on the panel. Have we got more by email or any others?
Yeah, so repeat the question.
You might need to come around a bit because I don't know if my microphone picks you up. Let's bring Kennedy in, the ghost behind the machine.
Hello, I've got. So Tim from Norton, Oxfordshire, Affordable Sustainable Homes Project asked, does it make it more or less likely to get phase 2 funding depending on whether you apply to get phase 1 funding? Phase 1 funding could be useful, but it's phase 2 capital funding that will be essential for our project, and we want to maximise the chances of getting that phase 2 funding.
Right. So the answer is it makes no difference, and lots of groups, I say lots, some groups were already at a stage where they could apply for capital funding and they didn't need the revenue funding, and they went straight in, and there have been capital funding allocations already granted and paid out. So if you're at that point where you don't really need that revenue funding, don't hang around, just get a capital bid straight in. And we really want to get as many bids in as possible, because we'll come to this at the end, but obviously the Community Housing Fund currently has a short shelf life, which means both that if you apply for capital funding, you need to get your skates on so you can actually get the allocation and spend it in time. And also, the more we can show the demand for the fund coming through, the more able we are to tell the government, or to persuade the government that it should be extended. So with your group in Oxfordshire, just get an application in, is what I'd say for capital. Neil Mann asks how Homes England will assess the financial viability and the value for money of schemes. So they will be using their standard approach to assessing value for money, but there is an understanding in that obviously if you're a brand new organisation, you would potentially need a higher grant rate than one that can, so a housing association with 1,000 homes that can draw on its assets and the bonds it's issued and so on to help finance schemes. So they will take a common sense approach to it, but they will be looking both to see that your scheme is financially viable. They won't give a capital grant to an unviable scheme, and they'll be looking to see that there's value for money. So they won't shower you with gold so that you can make rents absurdly low. They'll, if you're looking, for example, to do a social rent scheme, which needs quite a lot of grant, you'll need to demonstrate why there's a need for social rent in the area, and that grant is then the appropriate amount to help you deliver a quality social rented housing scheme. We've not had any feedback so far about problems with value for money. We've had all sorts of other problem feedback, but not on that issue so far. Okay, I'll carry on with this. Yep. Okay, Robin from Angmering CLT. Hi, Robin. Asks, what's the fund's best option to apply for funds to cover general running costs, like the indirect costs that aren't project specific? So this is a perennial problem that almost all the funding in this world is specifically for projects. Very few people give you funding just for general running costs. There was recently a grant program launched by the Nationwide Building Society that opened for a very brief window, which gave grants of £25,000 for those core running costs. And they were open to CLTs, and we're hoping that a good number of CLTs will win money through that. We will always alert you about any opportunities that come along like that. There are various lottery funds, and we mentioned some of them on a website, like Awards for All, that are worth looking at. They can sometimes give you up to £10,000 for core costs. You can also try to look for ways to include those costs in your Homes England Revenue Application Fund, and potentially also in your Homes and Communities Fund, with how to change if you're doing something very innovative, by tying them to the project. So obviously, if you've got general project management needs, then that will help you to deliver a project. If you want to do more community engagement to build your membership and get more engagement in your work generally, that obviously contributes to your project. So I think the trick is to try to relate things to your project as much as possible and see how far funders will accept those costs. CLTs otherwise, once they've completed, you get a bit of an income which helps, and some have managed to sometimes get money from their, I suppose applicable to Angmering, your parish council or the district council might give you bits of money. The other one is to do crowdfunding and to try and raise either donations or to do a community share issue to give you money that you're completely flexible about. Saul asked a question. So we got a few questions from Saul and from Brighton about the hub funding, and I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about that here. We have appointed 2 people I mentioned who will be working with hubs to help them with their hubs applications, and they'll be in touch with you very soon, probably the next week, and they'll be able to talk you through all the detailed questions about the hub funding. One question you ask, which is kind of interesting because it would be of interest to groups, is that we say that what we want is for enabling hubs to offer what we describe as a reasonable level of support to all groups, regardless of their chosen approach. So any enabler hub might take the view that it's only going to do work for you at risk, and either for free or at risk and get a fee at the end, if it thinks you've got a reasonable chance of success. So to pick 2 examples, if you are working with a housing association, you've got a secured site, and it's pretty likely that you're going to succeed. And so a hub would reasonably think, well, we can do lots of work for you at risk. If you're a group that is quite early stages, you don't have any land, you don't want to work with a housing association, you want to do a social rented CLT or co-op in a very expensive city, and it's all looking, you're not even quite sure what you're doing, then the hub might say, well, we'll sit down and have a chat with you and we'll talk to you about it. But that's as far as we'll go until you get further, or unless you can pay us up front. That's the kind of approach we're taking, is trying to get a balance between helping hubs to be viable social enterprises that aren't totally dependent on grants, and also making sure that groups don't just get turned away because they're not doing the easiest approach. Robin McDonald asked about, yes, so of course, with Angmering, so you've already had your phase 1 grant from Homes England. So what I was saying about Homes England grants covering those core costs, obviously that ship sailed for you, but could work for other projects. What I suggest, Robin, is looking at, as I said, it's parish council, district council, lottery funding, those sorts of sources. Unfortunately, it is very hard, as I say, to get core funding for non-project costs. Jackson asked, has there been any progress in multiple applications to Homes England? Groups would like to apply early on for early support, then will have used up their 1 bid for a small amount. So Homes England takes the view, which isn't the most helpful, that really a group should just be coming to them for 1 application, knowing the cost they're going to need for their project. So if you're quite early on and you don't yet know what the cost of your project is, I would advise you not to apply for the Homes England revenue funding straight off, but instead to go for something like our support programme, our startup fund, which you'll find on the Community-Led Homes website. And that will give you some money to get going and to scope out your project and get you to the point where you're able to say, with a reasonable degree of certainty, this is the sort of scheme we're doing. These are the numbers of homes, tenure, and these are the sorts of costs we're going to have. So you can make one application to Homes England for that full set of costs. Once you've made the application, there is scope for them to vary the grant amount slightly if your costs come in a bit higher or a bit lower, perfectly good reason. But you can't kind of come in then later on and say, oh, and we want to do this, and we want to do this, and we want to do this. It would be nice if you could do that, but unfortunately you can't. Leah from Bristol says, is it only worth applying for CHF Capital Fund if there's no chance the development will complete by March 2020? So to be honest, if you've no chance of completing or having spent most of the grant by March 2020, you probably won't be successful. Now, maybe that's a good time to talk a bit about the campaign to extend the CHF and where this leaves you, because we have had a really good response from MPs, thanks a lot to your lobbying, and Kennedy's been coordinating all that. And the ministry officials, the Housing Minister Kit Malthouse and the Secretary of State James Brokenshire have all made lots of supportive noises about extending the CHF. And I would say that they agree that it should be extended. It needs to be a decision that Treasury takes. Treasury has to sign that off, and they've been saying they'll make a decision through the spending review. Now, we've been told last year that a spending review would have happened by January, and then we were told it might be a bit later, and now we're being told either it'll be spring to summer, which one senior MP told us, or officials say they don't know. And basically what's happened, you might have noticed, is Brexit has tied government up. And there's no clarity at the moment about the spending review and when the government will be able to make a decision about things like this. So we don't know when a decision is going to be taken. And therefore, you're left in this awkward position where there might be a hiatus where it gets too late to be able to actually make an application and spend the money, that they haven't taken a decision to extend it yet. So you've basically two options. You can either go to the effort of putting forward an application. It will be really useful for us because it will show demand. And then it may be that you get knocked back or you get told, well, this is being paused until a decision has been made. So you will have gone through all that work. And if the CHF is extended, that work will be rewarded because then your application will go forward. Or if the CHF isn't extended, you will have wasted that work. But you may also find that you can work with Homes England to find other routes for funding it anyway. So there's the Affordable Homes Programme. And if what you're doing is affordable rent or shared ownership, or in some cases social rent, the standard kind of affordable housing products, it can still be funded that way anyway. It's only if you're doing an unusual product like resale price covenant or other forms of discount market sale or mutual home ownership or living rent or something else that's unusual that you would not be able to use those other routes. We may be at some point in the near future with the government asking you to submit a sort of expression of interest to show your desire for capital funding to help us make the case with Treasury, but we'll let you know about that. And please, if you haven't already, please write to your MP about this and let Kenzie know, because your work raising this MPs is a massive help for us. John Brownscombe, is there any published data on the average income per unit per annum for a CLT leasing land to an RP to assist with financial modelling? So there is a model that has been very, very popular in the Southwest that was pioneered by the Wessex CLT project, where a community land trust owns the freehold and it works in partnership with the housing association, and it leases the land to the housing association. And then the housing association pays for all the development. And then once built, it leases the homes from the CLT and it pays a ground rent. And the typical ground rent per unit is usually in the region of about £250 a year per home. And obviously you can net off of that all your other costs, and that's for negotiation with the housing association. Some housing associations are completely opposed to this and have been lobbying for CLTs to be banned from being able to issue ground rents or to charge ground rents. Others like Astor and Team Housing in the Southwest have been supportive and are perfectly happy with that arrangement. So hopefully that helps. So if you're doing 10 homes, but at least to a housing association, you might expect a ground rent in the region of £2,000 to £2,500 a year, for example. Neil again asks, is intermediate rent an eligible tenure for grant funding? Prospectus doesn't say it isn't. Yeah, so the prospectus is funny because Homes England didn't want to explicitly endorse any non-standard tenures, but what they say is you can use this funding to pay for shared ownership, affordable rent, social rent, or some other tenure. And that or some other tenure means you can do anything, absolutely anything, if you can demonstrate that it is meeting a local need, that it is affordable for people who actually need affordable housing, and that you're going to keep it affordable in perpetuity. So if you've got, well, however you determine your intermediate rent, let's say you go for the living rent idea and you say this is the median wage in the area. People on that median wage can't afford market rent, so we're going to set our rents tied to local wages. That's eligible. And you just have to demonstrate how you've done that, how that's then meeting a housing need, and how you're going to keep those rents at affordable levels into the future. And that's what's useful about the Community Housing Fund as opposed to the Affordable Homes Programme, is that we've got that degree of flexibility. So another one from Nancy. Is there an average day rate for CLT advice which can be put into the 6K grant for early stage groups not covered by an existing hub? So the startup fund that I mentioned, there are two halves to it. One is the cash grant for a group of £4,000, and then the other is a cash grant to help you to pay for advice. And that's where you don't have an enabler hub locally able to support you. Could be there's no enabler hub there, or they're not able to support you for some other reason, as we've heard already. The guidance for the grants should cover that. I can't recall off the top of my head. There is a cap to the amount that advisors can be paid so that we don't end up just paying exorbitant sums to very expensive consultants. And you can find your own advisors that you want to work with on a project, or you can ask for suggestions of advisors. We can give suggestions, and locality, which is administering that fund for community-led homes, can also give suggestions of advisors. In the past, just to give you an idea of a ballpark, with our startup fund, we've paid advisors up to £500 a day. And some people work in some parts of the country for less than that because living costs are lower. And then if you're in very expensive parts of the country, it can be quite hard to get people to work for £500 a day, which might sound mad, but there we go. Leah Eatwell asks, is it best to wait for CHF revenue grant and infrastructure grant to be approved before applying for capital funding? What I suggest is, as I said earlier, given the timescales, it's always possible that you will end up with a capital funding application that just gets paused because it can't go through to the Affordable Homes Programme, and the CHF say isn't extended, or we don't have a decision yet. It's well worth opening up a case on the Homes England system for your capital application and starting to put that information in. And then I just talk to your local contact about whether to hit submit on it. Well, you probably don't want to hit submit on it because you'll probably get a clearer idea about your exact capital funding needs through the course of the work that you'll do with your revenue application. But it's definitely worth opening up a case, if only because that gives you a head start. Make sure that you're having that conversation with the Homes England staff member early on. And from our point of view, it shows the government, oh, there's another capital application in on the system. Kenzie, have we got others that have not come through on this channel that we're waiting for? Okay, I'll spin you around to Kennedy.
Yeah, you might have covered some of these. So the questions you sent was, can intermediate rent attract grant? Is it subject to rent standard and RP registration required? I think you spoke to that a little bit.
A bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just pick up. So yes, intermediate is fine. The registered provider status is for any kind of rent that is below market rents. So if you charge a social rent or 8% of market rent or living rent or any other thing that is lower than market rents, either you need to become a registered provider or you need to partner with a registered provider, which could be a housing association or a co-op or a CLT that's already an RP, and they will be the landlord for the tenants. And that's to protect low-income tenants. That's written into statute as in law, so we can't change that. So you would need to become a registered provider or partner with a registered provider if you're doing those rents, but how you set your rents and how you do the allocations is to a certain extent up to you. So the rents levels, you just have to demonstrate to Homes England that it's meeting a need, and that shouldn't be too difficult. Most parts of the country, market rents aren't affordable to a significant number of people. And then it's not that the rents you're setting aren't subject to the other sort of normal rent standards that apply to things like affordable rent or social rent. You can have your own rent standard. And it's considered, the thing about, so Neil asked a few more questions about intermediate tenure. It does all get very confusing, and the term intermediate, I think, it's best just to put that out of your mind, because governments use all these different bits of terminology over the years, and they've all got quite confused. So it used to be that anything that wasn't social rent was considered intermediate and similar to shared ownership, and then they've kind of gone away from that. All you need to know is if you're charging some kind of low rent that is below market rent, it's considered some kind of low cost rent. You'll need to have a registered provider there, and you come up with your own rent standard and an approach to it.
Some more questions from Neil, but there is something that I've been waiting for a while. Josephine, back me.
Okay.
I don't know if they
Ask two questions. Does any of the funding grants in brackets require CLT to be either an RP or a charity? Quite straightforward. And if a CLT registers as a charity, can they claim further 25% on any grant funding from the government in brackets, like for other charitable donations?
Okay, so in our briefing for our members, we set out the RP status question. You don't need to be a registered provider for revenue funding, regardless of what you're doing. No revenue application requires you to have RP status, and it also doesn't require you to have charitable status. Just so long as you meet the other eligibility criteria, you would have to be some sort of legally incorporated organisation that meets the definition of something like a CLT or a co-op or a co-housing group. When you come to apply for capital funding, you will need to be a registered provider or have a partnership with a registered provider if you're doing rents that are below market levels. So if you're doing some kind of home ownership approach, like shared ownership, shared equity, discount market sale, mutual home ownership, you don't need to be a registered provider. If you're doing any kind of rent that's below market rents, you do, or you need to have a registered provider act as the landlord in partnership with you. Charitable status is a big decision for CLTs, and other groups will be putting a more detailed piece of guidance up on the Community-Led Homes website and sending it around to our members soon, which goes into more of the pros and cons about it, including tax implications. You can't claim gift aid in the way that if I donate you some money, you can, and then tip the gift aid tick box, you can get another 25% on top. You can't claim, to the best of my knowledge, gift aid on a grant donation like that. But charitable status can be useful with some funders that will only give money to charities. But I'd say read through the guidance that already exists on our website. If you look on under resources, the model rules sponsorship service, we have a bit of guidance on charitable status there. And as I say, we'll be bringing out some much more detailed guidance on that soon. Just on a sort of related note, so Alistair McPherson asked if there's any high-level guidance available to groups looking at the pros and cons of registered provider status. There is. It's been written by Self-Help Housing, and it's on the Community-Led Homes website. So if you go there, and it's under, I'm going to look myself so I get the instruction right. Under make it happen, and then resources, in there is a guide to registered provider status, which talks about the pros and cons as well as the process.
Got a question that speaks to that.
Yep.
So I haven't got a location or organisation, but from Steph, she asked, we're still in the early stages of our project, but I've seen the grants for becoming an RP. We've been wondering whether it's worth it for a while. What position do you think a group should be in before considering becoming an RP?
Okay, great question. So becoming a registered provider is obviously a big step. In brief, the pros are that you are then able to apply directly for capital grant from the government for rented homes. You can also end up with lower borrowing costs from banks, and local authorities would be more willing to recognise you as a provider of affordable housing in planning agreements. So it has all sorts of reputational and regulatory benefits for you if you want to go down that route. On the other hand, it does mean you're then regulated by the government, and some groups would choose not to do that unless they were forced to. There has historically been a worry that you'd be exposed to regulations and to policies that would be really damaging. So, for example, when the government announced the voluntary right to buy for housing associations, that would fatally undermine community land trusts if it applied to them. And similarly, when the government said it was going to force registered providers to cut their rents by 1% a year over 3 years, that would have been a real problem for the business plans of some CLTs, because that was way outside of the usual sensitivity testing you do for your rents. Now, we've actually been quite successful in lobbying for exemptions and exceptions to these policies, and government has so far recognised that small community-led providers need to be treated differently to larger RPs. So those are the sorts of factors you're considering when you're looking at whether or not to become a registered provider, and the briefing I mentioned, written by John Fitzmaurice from Self Help Housing, is a really good way of just giving you a brief introduction to all of those. When should you be thinking about this? Well, probably not right at the start, and we discourage people anyway from rushing into incorporating, setting yourself up as a legal entity, definitely going and become a registered provider before you have really figured out what you're trying to do. So the first thing you need to do is just establish a steering group of residents or group of local residents or of people in your community of interest, and start to scope out what you're trying to do, what your project is. When you get to the point where you have a good understanding of what your site might be, what your financing approach might be, then you're in a good place to start to incorporate, because then you can make sure that you incorporate in a form that provides for what you're going to do. And so, for example, do you need charitable status or not? You don't want to have incorporated and then discover you do or don't want that status, and then you have to undo and you have to re-register yourself as a new organisation. Some people have gone through that. When you get to the point of incorporating, it's useful at that point to know if you're going to become a registered provider, because your model of incorporation can be affected by it. So if you're becoming a community land trust, you would normally have a rule in your rules which provides the asset lock, which is to say this stops you from selling off your property. If you become a registered provider, you shouldn't have a rule on an asset lock, because the registered provider status provides the equivalent, and so you will have to go back and amend your rules. So if you're already incorporated, that's just a hassle you're going to have to go through. If you aren't incorporated yet, it's just useful at that stage to think about whether or not you're going to become a registered provider. You can't actually start applying for the process of becoming a registered provider until you are what the regulator calls an intending provider. And that means that they want to see that you've actually got a project on the books, you've maybe got a secure interest in a site, or you've got a memorandum of understanding with a landowner, you have developed your partnership, you've got a clear proposal coming through. And at that stage, it's then useful to start the process, because the process of becoming a registered provider can take anywhere from 8 months to a year. And obviously you want to get through that as quickly as possible. Leah asks, so we talked a lot about registered provider. The other confusingly similar abbreviation is IP, or investment partner. So in order to access capital grant from Homes England, you either need to be an investment partner or you need to work with one in what's called a consortium. So there may be housing associations locally that you can piggyback off the back of in order to make your application. And hopefully if you're working with a neighbour hub, they will have developed some of those relationships to help you do that. If not, you need to become an IP yourself. Now, there's also the option that you could create a consortium from community-led groups in your area. And I don't know of any consortia like that at the moment, but it's a great idea. It could be a good idea if there's an organisation in your neck of the woods that could take that kind of all that administrative work on, because it is no small feat to become an investment partner in the first place, and then to lead a consortium and have others coming behind you is a big piece of work. And they would have each organisation that piggybacks off the back of that consortium would need to feel confident that they've got a good bid, and the organisation that's at the heart of it wouldn't want to be exposed to too much risk. So that would be a big step to set up a consortium, but it's a really interesting idea.
So we have like a clarifying question a bit from Jolie from Rural Housing Solutions. He said, could you clarify the distinction investment partner?
Yes.
provider in terms of
Yes. So if you're applying for any capital grant, whether for rented homes or for home ownership, like shared ownership, any capital grant application will require that you are an investment partner or that you're working and piggybacking off an existing investment partner that's willing to help you. Every single group will need to do that. And becoming an investment partner is a bit time consuming, and a bit like the RP status, it really involves you demonstrating to Homes England that you are up to scratch in terms of your governance, your business plan, the viability of your scheme. And the £10,000 grants we have for RP status can also help you with gaining IP status. So if you need some specialist support to get you through that process, you can apply for that funding to help you with that as well. So that IP status applies to all projects. Registered provider status is totally separate. It's not to do with Homes England, it's to do with the regulator for social housing, that confusingly for a while was part of the same body as called Home HCA. The regulator will continue to regulate you for the foreseeable future as long as you exist, and will be looking to ensure that you have high customer service standards for your tenants, that you are a financially robust organisation, and you're well governed. That is only a requirement if you are providing rented housing, and as I said, you could also partner with an RP. So the RP is just for rented housing, and the IP is for both rented and home ownership. Again, there's a bit of information on this in our guidance, and it's covered a bit in the Homes England prospectus, and there's some of the guidance on the Community-Led Homes website. If you're still stuck and confused, then do talk to your advisor or your hub about it, and they should be able to help you navigate this.
We have time for one more question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Have you got any more coming through that I haven't seen on the channel?
We haven't got any
by email or
no? That's the ones on the channel.
Yes. I don't think I missed any. So if there's anyone more, Leah just asking a bit more about the consortium, the risks. To be honest, it's not an area I know a huge amount about, and I'm only guessing that the risk would be that if you are the lead organisation in the consortium, you would be taking a certain amount of responsibility for those other organisations that are joining your consortium or that are piggybacking off of you, and that would be obviously raising various risks. And for small CLH groups, that can become very time consuming. So see, Lorraine mentions the risk of spending time. Yep, that you could end up spending a lot of time doing all of this and then get nowhere. In terms of an individual group becoming an investment partner, that's partly why we've provided some funding to help you with that, so that at least you're not doing this work at risk, that you could at least be funded to go through that process of trying to become an investment partner, and then you're able to deliver a scheme. So I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much to you all for your questions. If you've got others that you want answering, then first of all, I'll plug for the fact that we're a membership body and we produce a detailed briefing for our members. And if you're not already a member of the National CLT Network, please do join. We are much stronger as a membership body than if we're all just individual groups doing our own thing. And if you are a member, we'll be in touch with you soon, because we're going to be going through all our renewals this spring. This video will remain online on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch it again if you want to capture anything from it. I don't know that we'll have the capacity to produce a transcript, as Saul suggests, which would be a lovely thing. If anyone else wants to produce a transcript, do feel free. There'll be more guidance coming through on the Community-Led Homes website and through our newsletter and so on. And if you've got other questions that you're not that aren't answered by a briefing, that can't be answered by a hub and so on, then just keep pinging them into us, and we'll see. We may well do another briefing like this in a few months' time later this year. And if there are other things you'd like us to do briefings on, then also just let Kennedy know, and we'll see what we can do. So we'd love to be able to do more webinars like this to help you out in particular areas. And if it might also involve us getting somebody else from another organisation or somebody with particular expertise to come along. We've had people actually contributing today with huge amounts of expertise. So any topics you'd like to get a webinar on, let us know, and we'll try to organise those for our members. So thanks all very much. Hope you have a lovely weekend. I'm off to Haverfordwest in Pembrokeshire for an event in Wales on Monday, and of course it's going to rain the whole weekend, having been unseasonably sunny. So despite the climate breakdown, we haven't got any kind of benefits for our trip to Wales. And I hope to see you all at some event sometime soon. And so it's goodbye from me.
Thank you.
Goodbye from Tilly. Goodbye. Thanks.
Bye, thanks.